I wanted to, excuse me, say something about COVID from a theological point of view, something that I've been thinking about and which I do Monday through Friday, small radio spots for Radio Maria Peru in Spanish. And I've talked about some of these topics quite often now for several months. How many viewers, I don't know. In English, I don't know how many people are going to see this, and I'm not even sure I'm going to publish it, but I thought that I wanted to share for whoever might be interested or find useful some of my reflections as a student of theology that taught theology for many years at a Catholic seminary. And from my own life experience, and at this end of the year, this is the 31st of December 2020, a terrible year, I wanted to share some of my thoughts for myself and for whoever else might be interested or feel they might benefit from this, from a theological reflection point of view. Theology, of course, was famously defined by Saint Anselm as fides quaerens intellectum, faith seeking understanding or to understand. And so I think that if I could contribute some well known to people in the business theological frameworks or topics to sort of put the COVID crisis in perspective of some sort, that would be my very humble contribution. I, in my life, have experienced lots of suffering. I I think I've learned certain qualities because of suffering, maybe compassion. My parents instilled that also to some extent, democratic or egalitarian sort of justice, fairness, education. My father had this saying, he was not a philosophically minded man or a reader even, but he was pretty smart and intuitive, and he had these very few kernels of wisdom that he imparted. Uh, One regarded drugs. He said, I was offered drugs, but I thought to myself, what if I like them? So he avoided addiction. And he had another saying, I don't look just at those who are better off than me, but I look behind to those who are worse off than me. So that was a humble kind of attitude. And so I think that it's a commonplace that suffering and the crucible of suffering refines us. The Book of Wisdom is famous for that. It speaks about this crucible where gold is refined in the Hebrew Bible, fire and smelting. Even the iron furnace is an image of the Babylonian exile, which forged Judaism as an unbreakable religion, one could say. And so I've recently sort of refined, if you will, pardon the pun, the expression divine pedagogy. Obviously, in the Old Testament, the concept of musar, spare the rod, spoil the child, divine discipline. It's found in many places in Proverbs. It's found in the great chapter 8 of Deuteronomy. The Lord discipline you like a father disciplines his children. The Greek version is paideia, where pedagogy comes from. The letter to the Hebrews talks about that. Divine correction or discipline, very much evocative of physical, corporal punishment, which is not in vogue or even legal these days, but certainly in the biblical world, it was commonplace. So Hebrews chapter 12 says that you suffer for your correction, sort of becoming maybe in Hebrew yashar, direct again or straight again. And Jesus was disciplined in Luke 22 twice. The verb of paideia is used for the scourging, and then the famous, of course, chapter 5 of Hebrews says that son though he was, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being perfected, etc. He became cause of eternal salvation for all those who obey him. So even Jesus, like the servant in Isaiah 53, the musar of our shalom upon him, the divine discipline that brought us shalom, peace, or salvation in that sense, of 53:5 in Isaiah, was put on Jesus. So that we have this background to the idea of divine pedagogy, and as I have been repeating in my little radio programs in Spanish, pedagogy alternates consolation, tribulation. If it's all consolation, you grow soft and flabby. I think that's what happened to me when I had the great job in the seminary for 14 years. It got easy and I let my guard down. And even though that's not the whole explanation for it, nevertheless, I certainly had a rude awakening when these rumbles began to grow nearer and nearer and louder of warnings that the new rector, I'm going to not name names, but I'll be specific. The new administration, very conservative and very, in fact, traumatized by the victory of Obama. They were all hoping on Romney. The rector had his picture with Romney in his office prominently displayed, and the spiritual director of the seminary had his picture of Obama as the Joker prominently displayed. So you can imagine what kind of spiritual direction he was giving. Students there going to learn how to be holier, and he's laughing at the, we have to say it, black president of the United States, the Joker. And so I was devastated when I lost my job. I had to empty my office, which had been my home. Even during the summers when everybody went away, I stayed there. And I wound up giving, and they counted them, 600 excellent books to the library of the seminary that had, in effect, fired me by not renewing my annual contract, which is all that lay professors had, even though my reviews had been very good every year. But a change of pharaoh, a new pharaoh that didn't quite know me in the same way as the other pharaohs came to power, and all of a sudden I was making bricks or forced out into the street to look for a job at age 60. By the time I lost the contract was over, I was 60 years old, looking for a job. Very difficult. And so if we read the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians, you'll find that this word Thlipsis, I'm sure, yes, it's Thlipsis, it's 12 times. And then, so that's tribulation. This is kind of an eschatological term of trial. And then you have this paraklesis, this consolation. And this is how God teaches us. The divine pedagogy is to alternate consolation so that we don't get discouraged, but tribulation so that we exercise our will, our faith, our hope, and our love too. And so I had this notion for many years, really, that comfortable situations don't last. I had a job one time that there was no business coming in. It was kind of wonderful for me because I didn't want to be working in something I didn't like, but I said, this can't last. No business lasts without customers. And in fact, sometime in 2019 and before, probably, observing what was going on in the United States, for example, observing the distraction, observing or recognizing that great millions of people, especially the youth, the blacks, and the Hispanics. They say 12 million eligible Hispanics to vote did not vote. Trump was elected. I hesitate to, that's why I said I was going to hesitate to publish this. I think he is basically absolutely evil. His whole demeanor, his way of behaving, his way of lying, his way of changing one thing from one day to the other, with a 60 million followers who believe everything he says, just like they would any other dictator on whom they have put blind faith. And I've even met whom I took to be simple, humble Christians, consider him raised by God or anointed by God. And I thought to myself, when I met these people a few years ago, I thought they were simple, but now I'm convinced they are simpletons. But my point is mainly the apathy, the distraction, everybody looking at their phones, everybody being titillated by silly things, losing the ability to think or care, to concentrate and focus on real things. I'd be driving in my car and I'm going, these people can't resist this addiction to look at their phones. I was on I-95. You're going 65 plus miles an hour, people having to be on their phones. And in my life experience, I'm in my 60s now, late 60s going to, I said, this can't last. And I shudder to think what it will take to wake us up, quote unquote. And so, in my own experience in life and views of the Bible and history and everything else, while England slept, this Churchill's book, I was reading about Kennedy, the 1,000 Days by Arthur Schlesinger, and I was kind of inspired by a sort of quote from Dante, not exactly Dante, but hell is reserved for those who in a crisis remained neutral. I don't want to remain neutral or wishy-washy or ambivalent or ambiguous as to my positions. And so I did post on Facebook more than once. Probably I shudder to think what it will take. And you can call that intuition, you can call that whatever, prophetic insight. I'm not going to claim anything other than I have learned, I think, to be honest and to value the truth. I was a Dominican friar studying for the priesthood, and the Dominican motto is veritas, the truth. I went to Harvard. Their motto is veritas, the truth. I took a course on Gandhiji, Mahatma Gandhi, the great soul. And he said, God is truth, or truth is God. So the truth to me is sacred. And that's, I think, the worst thing that has happened to us. And I think the main instigator, at least visibly, is our current and hopefully really outgoing president, attacking the very notion that there is a truth and there are alternative facts you can make up and that simple minds will believe because they want to believe. They want to believe either him or the simple facts. Play down the crisis, play down the COVID, play down numbers, play down, attack enemies, focus attention on someone else. If you know history, you know that's what Hitler did with a humiliated population after World War I. I've been reading about Kennedy. I knew Churchill had also counseled, don't be too hard on Germany. So on the one hand, they impose tremendous hardships on Germany, who feels very humiliated. They may have deserved it at some level because of the World War I that they started. But on the other hand, then everybody goes to sleep and allows Germany to arm. And you get a guy like Hitler, an orator, and Hitler finds a scapegoat, a very convenient one, the Jews, and proceeds to blame everything on them and have a solution, a final solution, get rid of the Jews. I was just reading about the crematoria, the concentration camp ovens, if you will, reading about Edith Stein. If you know this kind of history, you see these kinds of trends, you see what polarization leads to, you see what demagogy leads to, you see what taking advantage of people who feel frustrated and disenfranchised and humiliated feels like, and what a bully can do to make these humbler people feel this is our bully. We're mad and we want to kick somebody's behind. He used the term stop this carnage, which is the most ridiculous thing you could ever say. Stop what carnage? The police brutality, or maybe some rioting, which can either be diminished or increased depending on what happens, or is it the COVID carnage that you had to really take measures against? But it's demagogy. It sounds like a good thing to me if you are that kind of person. So that I knew something had to happen, and I know I didn't expect it to be this bad. In other words, the natural universe, our creation, God's creation, this common house, home that we have, as Pope Francis says, is susceptible to physical laws, and viruses occur, and there's evolution, and there are mutations. Even this virus has already apparently mutated to a more spreadable form. Some people like to focus on China. This is the China virus, and they believe that China invented it. So science is important. That's one of my topics. In the Catholic tradition, from the most orthodox theologian, Thomas Aquinas, who was not so orthodox when he first appeared, some local councils condemned him. You have to know the history of the church. What's orthodox now may not have been orthodox then. He teaches in the Catholic tradition, faith and reason. Faith seeking understanding from Anselm before him is that you have to use your reason to explicitate your faith. And Augustine also said you use your faith to also learn about things. So you have to have both. But if you have just faith and no reason, you're a fanatic or an ignoramus or a nut. And if you have just reason, you're a rationalist, and you are also, I think, trying to walk on one leg without a crutch. And so I think that instead of trying to blame China, you might try to understand that viruses may pass from animals to humans. And in any case, we are confronted with this great crisis. You're seeing here a picture of a doctor who looks very medieval doctor who looks very dangerous, but apparently he's wearing this long nose to fill it with nice smelling flower petals and things so he can approach a plague victim. This is probably the plague that started the year St. Catherine of Siena was born, 1347, the Black Plague. And so it's a graphic image that I took from CBS probably Sunday morning, some months ago, of an image of what the plague was back then and what it can be symbolized as being now. So we have this plague, and the Pope has said we don't want to go back to normal after the plague is over or just reduced to nothing because of vaccines or quarantine or all the other factors that will hopefully reduce this plague to a minimum, maybe like polio or some other eradicated or basically eradicated disease. We can't go back to normal. Normal is a very crazy world that we have been developing, of distraction, of inequality, of lying, of not thinking, total opposite of a philosophical reflective life, which is what I love to propose and what I think the Bible likes to propose. Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom is very important, and wisdom was with God, Lady Wisdom, that in the New Testament becomes the Logos, the masculine Logos. That's really the order in the universe of the Stoics. And when we are in tune with it and live a basically frugal, moderate life where we're not constantly rushing to acquire or to do or to multitask things, titillation, and avoid any kind of interiority. It's boring. Then you have a world where the guys that are really paying attention, who oftentimes don't have good intentions except to make money for themselves, they take advantage of it. I wanted to share something interesting from my notes. I want to plug my website, Bible Explainer. If you Google Chavez, my last name, Bible Explainer, you should get it. God leads the Israelites out of Egypt, slavery, through Moses. And they're in the holy mountain of God in Leviticus, Mount Sinai, or Horeb for the Deuteronomic school, same holy place. On their way to another holy mountain, the mountain of the Amorites, I learned this from Professor Norbert Lofink at the Biblical Institute in Rome. I think he for sure was the greatest expert on Deuteronomy, and I still think he is. And what I deduce from what he was talking about, if you read the beginning of Deuteronomy, it's an 11-day journey from Horeb, Sinai, to the mountain of the Amorites, which is already in Kadesh Barnea, the Holy Land, the place of destination. And instead of an 11-day journey, they took 38 years, Deuteronomy 2:14. Just like that paralyzed man near the pool of Bethsaida in John chapter 5. They wasted 38 years because of their lack of faith. And in the book of Numbers, what they really want to do is to undo God's salvific plan of taking them through the hardship of the desert to the Holy Land. And they complain the whole way, and they want to go back to Egypt, and they miss certain foods, and they fear certain things. And I just wanted to read to you something that I basically got from Fred Heim, a famous scholar in the Oxford Bible Commentary on the book of Numbers, that God ironically will grant the rebels their desires. Of course, that whole generation has to die, even Moses and Aaron. Only the little ones who don't know right from wrong, Numbers 14, will enter the land under the leadership of Joshua and Caleb. The people wanted to die in the desert, Numbers 14:2, and they will. Numbers 14:32-33. They rejected the land, 14:3. Well, they shall not enter it, 14:30. They had feared for their children, 14:3, and their children will suffer along with them, 14:33. The war they propose to wage shall not be holy, for Yahweh will not be with them, and they are miserably defeated. So you see that there's an appropriate sort of consequences to your evil actions. And in that, now, if we, now we're kind of hooked to technology and isolation because of the virus, and hopefully it'll be for good. It'll be part of this pedagogy. We will learn from it. Learn to share, learn to care, learn to pay attention, learn to be prepared for huge calamities that occur willy-nilly just due to nature. Even eliminating war and terrorism and mass shootings of isolated, disgruntled, bitter people with access to guns and armaments in huge quantities, who can live in a virtual world of games and things that are not real, and they lose their sense of reality. So even when we eliminate human malice and even error, we still have to confront the world and its storms and earthquakes and tsunamis and viruses and all kinds of other things. And for that, you need to be prepared. You need to gird your loins. Here's a picture of the martyrs in Rome. The church has gone through periods of martyrdom. Persecution still does in many places. Andrea Riccardi, the founder of the community of Sant'Egidio, which I think is probably let's say the best Catholic community there is. These are really mature Christians. They went from sort of leftist, Marxist-oriented young students in 1968, the year of the Paris marches and revolutions, to under the leadership of this gifted man, Andrea Riccardi, professor, layperson. He discovered that the gospel worked and not Marxism. That was not necessary. And so they began reading the Bible, and they began going to the outskirts of the city of Rome back then in the late 60s. It was founded in 68, early 70s, helping the gypsies and people like that at that time. And now they help in Africa and the immigrants in Italy, and they have stopped civil wars in Mozambique and acted in the diplomatic sort of behind the scenes efforts, successful in Central America, etc. And the lesson there is how you can, like Karl Barth said, with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper on the other, faith and understanding, faith and reason, try to help instead of blaming and lying and pointing the fingers and complaining and then isolating when things don't go your way. And democracy be damned and the people be damned. It's all about me. What an example. What an example. And I am shocked to see that even the Cardinal of New York supports this man. And so I think the lesson is that we need to convert. We need to look towards the new creation. This is a Salvadorian cross that I have. El Salvador, a land ravaged by civil war, if you will. The government against, yes, guerrillas, where a bishop, Romero, spoke out against the government troops killing their own citizens. I happened to be in Mexico, I think it was in the summer of 1980, the same year Romero was killed, if I'm not mistaken, where the oficio jurídico, the juridical office of the Archdiocese of San Salvador had to move. Romero had actually escorted, I think, this Roberto Cuellar to the plane so he wouldn't be killed on the way. And then in this office in Mexico City at the Dominican Church of Divino Redentor in the Colonia Roma, I saw so many photos and archives of the devastation caused really mostly by an army supported by the United States. So when we say these things, it's not to condemn America, but the truth will set us free, is my belief. And I'm reading about Kennedy, and Kennedy always understood, John F. Kennedy, always understood the other side, why people felt a certain way. He wanted to listen, he wanted to understand. This is what I have learned from, I think, listening to many sides. I've lived in 6 different countries. And I share with you what I believe so that I don't remain silent or neutral. Put in my 2 cents from the peanut gallery, as somebody has said. Romero was opposed for many years. Now he's a saint of the Catholic Church. He was killed saying Mass, elevating the host. A bullet through his heart. The community of Sant'Egidio commemorates the martyrs. I was talking about Andrea Riccardi. He wrote a book, The Century of Martyrs. 600-700 pages, huge book. Russia, Romania, lots of the communist world martyrs, other places, Central America, many other places, just the 20th century, by the suggestion of Pope John Paul II, who was a very good friend and dinner uh, host to Andrea Riccardi. And so when I look at this cross from El Salvador, I see the new creation. It's the cross, for sure. Christ was crucified. But our belief is that he rose from the dead and is a new creation, and we should act like this new creation where we don't worry about what to eat or dress, but rather feed the multitude. Lazarus is at our gate while many of us banquet. The real gospel, sine glossa, without these little commentaries that water it down to make it convenient for us. St. Francis of Assisi, which is why the Pope took that name. The famous scene where, when he is finally clearly elected, Cardinal Humes from Brazil said to him, who's a Franciscan, by the way, said to him, don't forget the poor. And the Pope had the inspiration of adopting for the first time the name Francis of Assisi. St. Francis, a conversion. He was a 13th century party animal, singer and all this stuff. And one way or the other, in prison, whatever, Ignatius of Loyola had to be hit in the leg by a cannonball. Others had conversion some other ways, but he became a new creature, likable and admired by everyone. And that's what we should strive for. That's what I'm trying to strive for. I have not yet arrived there. St. Paul himself says in Philippians, God is calling me from above. I don't think I have yet reached it, but one thing I do, I forget what lies behind, and I launch myself to what is ahead, running towards the goal to attain the prize to which God calls me from above in Christ Jesus. So therefore, all the perfect, let us have these sentiments, and if in something you feel otherwise, God will also make that clear to you. Otherwise, from the point to which we have arrived, let us go forward. And so I think my closing words are basically, we have a lot of reason to hope if we do the right thing. It sounds like a commonplace. And I think the right thing begins with reflection, prayer, thinking, dialogue, studying, cooperation, involvement, calm. In calm and security is your salvation, says Isaiah, I think chapter 30, verse 15, which is part of the Carmelite primitive rule. Speaking of which, now towards the end, I present a picture of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, given to me as a gift by one of the postulants in Toledo, Spain, where I spent 9 months, like John of the Cross, not in prison, but sometimes feeling like I was in prison. And I came out of that tribulation, because I was dismissed. I came out of that tribulation better and stronger. So that's my little testimony. under the mantle, protective mantle, of which I literally got into under in Mexico City, the Templo del Carmen with Angelita Florio, a dear friend of mine who got her way and got us both into this mantle that's only uh, for July 16th, the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and for a crowd, we were alone, and she got the sacristan to let us in there. Nothing is impossible for God, and maybe for Angelita Florio too, but we really should be renewed in hope in the interior person, like St. Paul says, and really see this in the light of God's pedagogy, where we can learn from it, and He won't always be scolding or correcting us, but will also console us. Paraklesis, the Paraclete, the Holy Spirit, which renews the face of the earth. And with that, I'm going to stop.